Just 48 hours after US President Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska, Ukrainian and European leaders arrived in Washington, D.C. President Zelenskyy was joined by key European and NATO leaders for a meeting on Monday afternoon at the White House. Ukraine wants to make sure it has direct involvement in a potential peace deal, while Russia and Europeans are looking for security guarantees. We begin our coverage with Nick Harper right here in Washington, D.C. Nick, we understand the meeting is now over. Is there any sense of what was accomplished?
That's right, and we're told that the day of multi-part meetings is now over. President Zelenskyy has left the White House. Some of the other Europeans are sticking around, having dinner with President Trump. It does seem, though, a lot like Alaska, it has been a day of talking, but perhaps a day light on decisions. One of the biggest bits of news was reported on social media within the last hour by Donald Trump himself, saying that he is now making arrangements for a bilateral meeting between President Zelenskyy and President Putin, and then that would be followed by a trilateral meeting, himself joining as well. It's not exactly clear where that will take place or when it will take place. The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says the timeframe is perhaps within the next 2 weeks. However, reports from the Kremlin seem to be less emphatic about this meeting between the president of Russia and the president of Ukraine actually taking place. They are reporting that they discussed the idea of exploring the possibility of raising the level of representatives. So they're happy to keep talking, but they might not want to sit down directly with the two leaders. There was the issue of security guarantees. It was certainly discussed during the course of today. But what's not clear is exactly what those security guarantees might look like. We do know, though, that everyone seems to be on board, including the United States. President Zelenskyy spelt out how crucial it was that Ukraine got security guarantees to make sure that it wasn't invaded in the future. Here's what he had to say a little bit earlier.
Security in Ukraine depends on the United States and on you and on those leaders who are with us. In our hearts, they have been online before yesterday, and etc. So a lot of countries on the side of Ukraine, our people, and all of us want to finish this war, stop Russia and stop this war. We spoke about it, and we will speak more about security guarantees. This is very important that the United States gives such strong signal and is ready for security guarantees.
And the US did give strong signals. The US president saying that the US would give very good protection and very good security, but he did say that Europe would carry most of the burden. Now, we know that Ukraine will not be able to join NATO. That's a red line for Russia, but it might get NATO-like security guarantees. That important Article 5, the security provision that NATO members get. In that, if any NATO member is attacked, the other NATO members stand ready to defend that. That is something that Ukraine might get out of all of this, but it's unclear what it would look like. Could it involve a peacekeeping force, including US troops stationed either within Europe or inside Ukraine's borders itself? All of these details seem to have been discussed today, but it's unclear exactly what was decided on. Many details, I think, will still need to come out in the coming days and the coming weeks, potentially.
Right, and Nick, one quick point. During the meeting, President Trump called the Russian leader, President Putin. He paused the meeting to call President Putin.
That's right, yeah, a 40-minute phone call, according to the Kremlin. What's not entirely clear is if it was during that meeting with the Europeans, as was being reported by one German newspaper, or if it was after the meeting, as Donald Trump seems to suggest in his social media post. But the thinking is that part of that 40-minute conversation was very much about trying to move things in the direction of a direct meeting between President Zelenskyy and President Putin. That is something that Donald Trump seemed to be suggesting going into today was going to be a win for him if he could agree that by the end of today. But importantly, he did say in that social media post that he has begun the arrangements for a meeting. He hasn't yet nailed down all of the details. Again, more details that we're hoping will come out at some point soon.
Okay, thanks, Nick. That's Nick Harper reporting there from the White House. Now, for more on efforts to end the conflict in Ukraine, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Moscow is Dmitry Babich. He's a journalist and Russian political analyst. Also with us here in Washington, D.C., Anton Fedyashin is a professor of history at American University who specializes in Russian and European affairs. William Lawrence is a professor of political science and international affairs at American University. And from Kyiv, we're joined by Oleksii Riabchyn. He is a strategic advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Oleksii, let me start with you. This was a crucial meeting for President Zelenskyy as well as Ukraine. And we've just heard President Trump describe today's meetings with the Europeans, with President Zelenskyy as well, as being very good. And we also heard from our correspondent there that President Trump is making arrangements for a bilateral meeting between President Zelenskyy and President Putin, which will be followed by a trilateral meeting in which President Trump himself will be involved. So what is your assessment of what's happened today?
So first of all, congrats with a great show, a great timing. I guess like the events are like occurring right now and we are commenting it. Congratulations for this. And I guess like we're happy with the consequences of the negotiation today in the White House, because last week after the Alaska meeting, we were like a bit, I would even say, shocked with the narratives that we need to trade territories, which will never happen. And currently, with our European allies, with the President Trump position to put the negotiation forward, I guess this is like indeed what we are like, and our president is saying like for like almost a year, like we need bilateral or trilateral negotiation directly with the Russian leadership, like to see whether Putin definitely wants to stop the war, like indeed, or like he's just trading some time to capture more land and territory. So like we will see further, but like currently, I guess the mood in Kyiv are like completely fine. Everything is going according to the scenario that our president planned.
And just to clarify with you, Oleksii, the red lines for Ukraine are territorial concessions I mean, that's one of the red lines. And what are the other things that where Ukraine would need to compromise?
So like it's not like even a red line, it's just like barely impossible. So like you cannot trade the territories. And when you said like trade territories, what we need, trade Ukrainian territories for Ukrainian territories, or Russia will surrender some of their land for us. Like I don't understand this term. And like we don't have even in the constitution the possibility of trading territories, surrendering our cities. Like it's like it just like barely impossible. So this is for us the main line. Yeah. Another line is to de jure consider the occupation of Crimea and the part of the territory that Russia is currently controlling. This is another red line that it will never be accepted for Ukraine. The rest, I guess, like we can discuss and see where the compromises are.
Okay. Anton Fedyashin, we are short on details and what exactly was decided, if anything was decided at today's meetings. But one of the comments we heard from President Trump as well as from other leaders, especially those from Europe and President Zelenskyy as well, was security guarantees for Ukraine. In fact, President Trump held out the possibility at one time, he was speculating that there could be U.S. troops deployed in Ukraine. How significant is that?
Again, the details are very short, Anand. U.S. troops in Ukraine has been ruled out, but there has been talk about security guarantees. This is the area where the greatest amount of compromise room exists for all of the parties. So first of all, Ukraine already has a bunch of security guarantees that it negotiated in a bilateral fashion with multiple countries. Great Britain, I'll remind our viewers, signed a 100-year-long security arrangement with Ukraine, and given that President Zelenskyy now has to ask for renewed guarantees, it tells me that the original ones weren't worth terribly much. So these guarantees are going to have to be a lot more serious. But that runs into the territorial issue. If Ukraine does not either de facto, de jure, I think it's going to be out of the question for the Ukrainians, but if it doesn't de facto recognize the Russian holding of parts of its territory, I don't see how European countries are going to commit to its security with the threat of an attempt to retake those territories, risking dragging European countries into a war with Russia. So everything is interlocked in this deal that's going to be negotiated, which means that it's going to take a long time. And it won't be able to be broken up into baskets and sort of mechanically, neatly arranged. Organic, biological is more of the approach that this is going to take, and that always takes a long time. But at least we have taken the first steps in that direction, and that really is a break from the previous administration here in Washington.
William Lawrence, some important points there raised by Anton, and that is if there are no territorial concessions made by Ukraine, and that is one of the demands being made by Russia, and that demand was made to President Trump during that meeting that took place in Alaska. I mean, what's the alternative?
Well, there's a lot of different ways you can land swap or redraw the front lines, and Anton's got it right about de jure and de facto being a big piece of this. But the way I think of it is simply, you know, Crimea is one thing, and Trump has already said many times on social media that the Russians will get Crimea. Now that's very problematic, as your Ukrainian guest said, and not even legal under the Ukrainian constitution. But there's going to be some special carve-out for Crimea if there's a peace deal. Then there's the question of the Donbass, which Russia doesn't even fully control, and possibility of moving the lines in the other two oblasts to the south as they adjust the lines to the north. And there are many, many issues there, but one is that there's this string of sort of a fortress line of cities in northwestern Donetsk that if that gets handed to the Russians, it makes the middle of Ukraine very vulnerable. All I'm saying here is that there are legal considerations and strategic considerations and many other considerations, political, geopolitical, that come into play and make this really, really complicated. But it will all be de facto. I mean, the fact that it's on paper and negotiated means that it might be de jure in that sense. But I highly suspect Ukraine's going to try to give up no territory de jure, and that Putin's going to have to settle for control rather than any sort of guarantee that he can keep the territory forever. And so all of these games is about, you know, how long you can keep the peace rather than, you know, will there be permanent peace in this region? Because, you know, Putin's made it clear. He wants either all of Ukraine to bow to him or he wants all of Ukraine. And so there's a long game he's playing that these negotiations really don't take full account of.
Okay, let's go to Moscow to Dmitry Babich. Dmitry, President Putin took that very late-night call from President Trump on the talks that have been taking place here in Washington, D.C. And as I said, one of the things we heard come out of those talks was that President Trump is saying that he is making arrangements for a bilateral meeting between President Putin and President Zelenskyy, followed by a trilateral meeting, including President Trump himself. What do you make of that? I mean, do you see a bilateral meeting taking place in the near term?
I think it's possible. Putin said that it was possible, that he didn't rule out a meeting with Zelenskyy if what our president called the root causes of the conflict are addressed and if they're removed. Also, let me remind you that in Alaska, Putin said that Russia recognizes the need for security guarantees for Ukraine. The other question, what kind of security guarantees? Actually, legally, there are three kinds of guarantees. There is so-called collective security, when a group of countries says that we'll protect this or that country, an attack against this country will be an attack against us all. And this is pretty much what Article 5 of NATO says. And of course, the European leaders will push for this solution. But there is also another more acceptable solution. It is called guarantee of neutrality. You know, there are many cases in European history when a certain country which was placed between, for example, two hostile blocs, that is exactly the case of Ukraine, other countries agreed that this country will stay neutral no one will touch it. No foreign troops can be placed on its soil. And this, I think, would be much more acceptable for Russia. Russia will not accept NATO troops on the territory of Ukraine because certainly these are not neutral troops. They will support the regime in Kiev, headed by Mr. Zelenskyy or someone else who will, of course, be anti-Russian. And in this way, we will not really end the conflict.
Yeah.
And of course, Russia will not agree to a truce without any conditions. But I think that even Mr. Trump doesn't want anymore. From his statements from yesterday and today, we understand that Trump kind of agreed with President Putin that before the truce, you need to agree on certain ways of settling the conflict.
Yeah.
Removing the causes for that conflict.
All right, let me get Oleksii's view on that. Oleksii, is that a viable solution for Ukraine, what Dmitry calls a guarantee of neutrality, that Ukraine becomes a neutral country, it does not have troops from NATO countries on its soil?
You know, the causes of this conflict, it's only one. Russia is an empire state. It needs to collapse, and it will happen one day because of the fragile economy of Russia. This is the only cause of this aggression. Attack of Russia, war of Russia. They cross the border and attack the independent state, and this is the only cause of this war. But like speaking about neutrality, we were a neutral country. We were and still a neutral country, without any kind of, you know, like with a NATO aspiration, but we are not the member of NATO. So like it won't work. And the only guarantee, security guarantee for us is Ukrainian army, which is restricting Putin to attack further. And like what was discussed today is that like Ukraine will spend together with our European allies more than like 100 billion euros to arm itself, to arm its army. To build more weapons, to build and to sell more drones, and this is we call the security guarantees. More secure Ukraine with more weapon and more soldiers able to kill more Russian if they will attack further.
So, Oleksii, would Ukraine be able to again say that it will be a neutral? In fact, your declaration of sovereignty, which was adopted well, a long time ago, almost 30 years ago, says that it is a neutral country. And wouldn't that change if Ukraine seeks NATO membership?
Look, like we are a neutral country, we are not the member of NATO, so we are now a neutral country. So what was proposed by a colleague from Moscow, like it's a nonsense. So Russia attacked a neutral country. Russia attacked a country which had the friendship agreement, had the Budapest agreement, which Russia guaranteed our territorial integrity. So everything about neutrality is a bullshit.
Okay, Anton. President Trump initially wanted a ceasefire before comprehensive negotiations to reach a peace settlement. But after that meeting in Alaska, he came around to President Putin's point of view, which was that they need to go for a complete peace settlement immediately, bypassing a ceasefire. How significant a change was that?
Well, very significant because it pulled Donald Trump onto the side of the Russians. But having said that, ultimately, a comprehensive peace agreement is the best guarantee for the ultimate settlement of the Ukraine conflict, because I think, as Donald Trump understood, after his meeting with Vladimir Putin, I'm sure his military advisors have also cleared the way for this. A frozen conflict is going to be a trigger for potential conflict in the future, even if the current one is temporarily settled. So the way to approach this, as all successful agreements have done in the history of diplomacy, is to bring in multiple parties, agree on multiple level guarantees and conditions, and then make sure that all of the parties check each other and a balance of interests is achieved. This, of course, was not what was happening over the past 14 years in Ukraine, 11 years to be specific, since 2014, as NATO began to pull Ukraine into its sphere of influence. And that started with the 2013 European Association Agreement, Title II of which explicitly stated, black on white, and our viewers can just pull up the document and read it, that Ukraine was going to be incorporated into the European sphere of security. And that could have meant only one thing, NATO. And unfortunately for the Ukrainians, they got the worst possible option. They were promised a path to NATO. They accepted it by removing neutrality from their constitution after the anti-constitutional violent coup d'etat in 2014. But what they didn't get while moving towards NATO were any security guarantees whatsoever. And that is the absolute kiss of death, and a large reason for why we're seeing the tragedy that's unfolding right now unfold.
William Lawrence, in remarks made by the European leaders shortly before they went into their formal meetings, there was speaker after speaker, leader after leader, who talked about security guarantees for Ukraine. The big question is, who guarantees security in Ukraine? There was a time not so long ago when the United Kingdom leader, Keir Starmer, was talking about a coalition of the willing, and this coalition could possibly be deployed in Ukraine to guarantee that country's security. I mean, how is this issue going to be overcome?
Creatively. Let me start by saying I was with one senior U.S. diplomat in a conversation last year about these issues, and he said one thing that people don't understand when it comes to security guarantees is that it's a little bit like an insurance policy. It usually has a deductible. And so there's no guarantee except if it's ironclad, like the NATO Article 5, which is about as strong as they get, that a security guarantee is going to yield what you want it to yield. And I've been thinking, listening to this conversation too, that you know, if you put UN peacekeepers, you know, what usually happens when US peacekeepers go in somewhere in these, you know, hopefully neutral situations, is they just walk away when the next invasion occurs. And so your question is apt. Like, who exactly is going to guarantee this? And the fact that Trump said he's willing to put US troops in, notwithstanding what Anton said, means that Trump understands what's going on. Let me also say that, you know, in 1994, in exchange for the removal of nuclear weapons, Russia said it would guarantee Ukrainian sovereignty, and Russia has broken every single agreement since then. So you need a robust enough security guarantee that it looks something like, as Macron has been saying for at least a year now, French troops on the front line and other, you know, well-armed, well-trained troops that can deter rather than just fill space in a neutral area. And if I can make one last point, you know, Putin, if NATO was his main concern here, NATO encroachment, he's made NATO-like guarantees the only option here, and he's pushed Sweden and Finland into NATO. So it's sort of the opposite of what you know, his stated goals are. He's bringing NATO closer rather than pushing it away.
Right, William, very quickly, I've just got a little bit of time left, and I want to get to Dmitry again, but when you talk about guarantees that already exist, are you talking about the Budapest Memorandum? Is that a sufficient guarantee?
No, I mean, nothing's sufficient. It's just the strongest guarantee you get is two types of things. It's the type of collective security agreement that our Russian guest outlined, and it's arms and troops on the front line who are actually willing to fight rather than melt away when the attack happens.
Okay. Dmitry, what are the next steps for Russia?
Well, I think it will depend on this bilateral and trilateral meeting that we're going to have. But before I say it, I would like to correct some facts here, because that's important. I didn't want to talk about the past, I want to talk about the future, but this is very important. Finland and Sweden were de facto NATO members since 2014, after Russia started resisting NATO's westward expansion. They conducted many dozens of exercises near St. Petersburg, in the Baltics, on the Finnish territory, on the Swedish territory, everywhere Russia was the supposed enemy. That was between 2014 and 2022. So it's an ugly lie to say that Russia pushed Finland and Sweden into NATO. They had been de facto in NATO before that.
Yeah.
And this was one of the reasons why Putin decided to use force in 2022. And of course, agreements and the Ukrainian constitution have been broken many times by the Ukrainian and by the Western side. For example, Zelenskyy had no right to send Ukrainian troops into Russia in Kursk region last year, or in August last year, without consulting the parliament. He did it. He did have the right to bar Ukrainian men until the age of 65 to leave Ukrainian territory. He did it. When Commonwealth of Independent States was established instead of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine was supposed to be a friend of Russia. That is the name of the Commonwealth, Soдружество in Russian, which means a union of friends. Ukraine became a hostile country to Russia after two coups in which basically pro-Western and very nationalistic forces were put in power. So this is the real story, the real pre-story of what's going on now. What's going now is a tragedy, and this is very good that President Trump and President Putin agreed to end it.
Right. Okay. I've got a minute. I want to get to Oleksii.
We already see that Europeans are resisting it.
Okay. I want to get to Oleksii. Oleksii, these are very nascent negotiations that we're talking about right here. How confident or optimistic are you that it could lead to some kind of meaningful end to the war?
The only reason for the war is that Russia is an empire state and Putin is willing to restore the Soviet Union, full stop. And we are super confident in our president, and we are supporting him in his aspiration to stop the war. And we think that, and we appreciate the efforts, of course, of the President Trump and European leaders to come to the Washington, D.C. and to discuss it. And we're looking forward for the further development of the situation to stop the war and to see whether President Putin indeed want to stop the war and stop the fight, or he just like wasting our time and will receive more sanctions, which destroyed Russian economy.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anton in Washington.